Ladies and gentlemen, I am Yusril and welcome to a look at the Palisade science vessel. Before I get properly started, major thanks are due to @InputEnd, who not only talked me into doing this, but also supplied the ship. If you see him around, feel free to credit and or blame as you see appropriate. On to business. The Palisade is a player version of the frigate used by the Voth in Season 8. It can be had for 800 Lobi, or for energy credits via the exchange, where, at the time of writing, prices were hovering at about 80 million credits. What do you get for the cash? The ship's base stats are at the durable end for science vessels, 33,000 base hull and a shield modifier of 1.45 backed by a crew of 500, with the usual 3 weapons fore and aft, innate subsystem targeting and sensor analysis providing the expected firepower. Agility is mid-range to high for science vessels, a base turn of 11, 40 inertia and a 0.15 impulse modifier mean that it'll match or outperform just about anything short of an escort in a turning contest. Looking at appearances, there's only the one hull mesh, but Cryptic have provided an alternative, and I suspect faction-specific skin, the Type 5A. Hull patterning is present, but it's extremely subtle, and I have to admit to not being sure what, if anything, the custom palette options are changing on this ship. An interesting little tidbit is that the template name is Voth Dreadnought, not Voth Palisade. While it's tempting to look at the Citadel Dreadnought and speculate on what might have been, it's more likely that the Citadel, STO's take on the ship seen in Voyager's episode Distant Origin, served as the template for the other Voth vessels in production, and just nobody got around to changing the name. Besides, it never would have fitted into space dock or the breaches in the passageways. There's also the question of the bridge, and we get a special one with this ship. It's the same one we get with the Bastion, and after the disappointment that was the Andorian bridge, oh boy, someone got their act together. It's a one-room set that has most bridge functionality concentrated in it, although curiously it has account bank functions but not the personal bank, and you know what? I'm just going to shut up for a few seconds and let you look at the epic. On the equipment front, the standard fitting isn't quite what you'd expect. The deflector, impulse drive and matter-antimatter core are all the standard common Mark 10s, but the weapons, while also common Mark 10, are the Voth anti-proton beams and their transphasic stroke chronoton hybrid torpedoes. The beam arrays, one dual bank and one array forward, 2 arrays aft, have a 25% chance on a critical hit to reduce the target's damage by about 9% for 10 seconds, and the torpedoes have both the enhanced shield penetration of transphasics and the snaring effect of chronoton torpedoes, not to mention that they use the Voth weapon visuals. The downside, sadly, is that the torpedoes also have the damage output of a transphasic torpedo, and when the cutting edge is Mark 12 with multiple accuracy and crit chance modifiers, the proc doesn't really save these weapons from being rapidly replaced. While the Voth lockbox does have a chance to drop better versions of the beam arrays, and my cruiser will be getting these once the new Vulnerability Seeker consoles are available, the Palisade, and I assume the Bastion's standard gear, is currently the only way to obtain the hybrid torpedoes. It may be that we'll gain access to torpedo tubes in a late tier mission in the Dyson Sphere reputation, but Cryptic are being, well, cryptic about it. At present, therefore, these are an interesting utility weapon, but they'll likely be quickly replaced by anyone looking for actual damage output. Of course, if you are looking for more DACA, then why are you looking at the Palisade anyway? This is very much the traditional science ship, and the console layout reflects that. 5 science, 3 engineering, and a measly 2 tactical mean it'll never be leading in the pew-pew stakes, but it excels in the support, control, and healing roles, and this is backed up by a very potent bridge officer layout. Commander Science and Lieutenant Commander Engineering are fixed. As I said, this is a science ship, but it supplements these with Lieutenant and Lieutenant Commander Universal stations, which opens up some unusual possibilities, such as a heavy control and heal hybrid, or even a double engineer auxiliary to battery build, which turned out to be interesting in the same way that landing without enough flow to offset the burn through is interesting. Note that possibly does not mean smart. No lockbox ship would be complete without a special console, and the Palisade has the Aceton field generator. On its own, it allows access to Aceton mode, a 20-second long ability with a 3-minute cooldown. During the 20-second charging phase, all enemies within 5 km are hit with a stacking debuff to their power levels, about -5 to -6 depending on your flow capacitor skill, but it increments every second to a maximum of 6 times, so if you mix it up with other area drains like Tychon's Rift, then you can be looking at multiple subsystem disables. Additionally, every attack, no matter how weak or potent from an energy weapon, will give you 2.5 aceton charge up to a maximum of 100. The immediate effect is to increase your damage resistance by up to 100. Presumably this is a linear correlation, with each 2.5 charge giving 2.5 resist rating. At the end of the phase, the stored charge is released as an area of effect attack, hitting every hostile within 5 km for up to 4,000 to 5,000 radiation damage, depending on your particle generator skill and the amount of charge you had accumulated. All in all, it's a potent little piece of gear, made more so when you mix it with the Bastion's special console to give you a free 10% damage resistance rating, or rather plus 10 damage resistance, and access to the Voth cloak ability, which as far as I can tell is a standard cloaking device with Voth visuals. There is, however, one tiny little problem with it. Getting the maximum effect out of the console does require you to get hit 40 times in 20 seconds. That usually means multiple and rather ticked off hostiles with guns pointed at you. It's desirable for a tanking cruiser like the Bastion. It's practically its raison d'etre, in fact, especially with the new cruiser commands and the threat generation consoles from the Embassy, but for a support ship like the Palisade, not so much, no matter how durable it is relative to other support vessels. So, overall, we're looking at one of the best support and science vessels currently in game, with the ability to go heavy on science or engineering to taste, and even deploy attack patterns and high-level subsystem targeting. The question is, what's the competition? On the Federation side, the Vesta and the Fleet Atrox are the two main competitors. Yes, the Fleet Atrox, once we have access to it. Massively tougher, 2 hangar bays, the same 3-3 weapons load, plus the ability to mount dual cannon, not that that's necessarily a good idea on that ship, and at 20,000 fleet credits and 4 or 5 fleet modules to purchase, somewhat cheaper than the Palisade. The downsides are that it steers like a cow, and its bridge officer, despite having 2 lieutenant commanders, is completely fixed with no universal slots, so it's restricted to a heavy science with moderate engineering. By contrast, the Vesta trades durability for a significant boost to firepower. It has a hangar bay, the ability to mount dual cannon, and the auxiliary phaser cannon that it comes with reduce the usual trade-off between auxiliary and weapon power levels. In particular, the reconnaissance variant, which mounts 4 tactical console slots, is at a significant advantage in general PvE gameplay, where the broad rule is apply DPS liberally and often. The major trade-off is that the engineering station is downgraded to a lieutenant, and any build that makes solid use of the cannon will probably have to stick a tactical officer into the universal lieutenant commander station. But overall, the Vesta can be configured to play support just as well as the Palisade, and it can reconfigure to vaguely approximate an escort, before you factor in the hangar bay and the various consoles it comes with. Over on the Klingon side, the competition comes from the Fleet Volkov, the Fleet Varanus, and of all things, the Fleet Norch and Burrell birds of prey. Klingons being Klingons, these ships are usually more aggressive than the Palisade. The Volkuv swaps the tactical and engineering stations of the Aatrox for a more aggressive take on the heavy carrier, although it does lose supportability in the process. The fleet Varanus is cheaper than the Palisade at the usual 20,000 credits and 4 fleet modules, but it's less durable, less flexible. A Science Lieutenant Commander replaces the Universal station on the Palisade, and it's less effective in the support role, swapping the Engineering Lieutenant Commander for a Lieutenant and an Ensign, and replacing a Science console with a third tactical console. In the support role, it's basically inferior to the Palisade, but it is currently about half the price, and unlike the Volkuv, it doesn't need 3 weeks' notice to get turned around. If the Birds of Prey seem like an oddball choice for a support ship, remember that they have full universal bridge officer stations. The Norch has a slight edge in customization since it has a second Lieutenant Commander station, while the Burrell has an extra engineering console, and the enhanced battle cloak allows it to remain more or less hidden while acting as a support ship and optionally spamming Shakespeare onto the comm channels. These ships are also much faster and more manoeuvrable than the Palisade, and courtesy of the battle cloak, can disengage relatively easily from fights or even reconfigure into their traditional escort style mid-battle. The downside, of course, is that these ships are brutally fragile, even by comparison to a science vessel. For the Romulans, there's only really one competitor, the Fleet Hunom Guardian Warbird. This is about as durable as the Palisade. It has the same base hull, a 1.4 shield modifier, and a larger crew, but it trades off an engineering console for a third tactical console and downgrades the Lieutenant Commander Engineer, replacing it with an Engineering Lieutenant and a Tactical Ensign. The Universal slots are also gone, replaced by a Tactical Lieutenant and a Science Lieutenant Commander, so while it's still an effective support build, it lacks a little bit of the oomph of the Palisade, and it also has less customization and can't deploy a Tactical Lieutenant Commander. Its big advantage is that it's a warbird, so it has a battle cloak and a singularity core, giving it the ability to fade out of a situation that's getting out of hand and deploy the various singularity abilities, most notably the teleport and the absorption if push comes to shove. Finally, we have the Orb Weaver, which is open to all 3 factions and currently trading for about 75 to 80 million energy credits on the exchange, and which my ability to comment on is purely theoretical since I don't have it. However, a quick glance at the stats on Gamepedia suggests a ship that's more or less comparable to the Palisade. A slightly thinner hull, one less science console traded for a tactical console, and the tactical lieutenant swapped for a tactical ensign and a science ensign, which might perhaps make up for the loss of the console. Oh, and of course it has the Tholian web weaving console, so that will help in the control role. It's got a very similar price, about 80 million energy credits, and on paper at least similar performance, so they should be more or less interchangeable, but as I said, this is purely theoretical and speculation. All of which brings us to the important question, to buy or not to buy. Klingon players looking for a traditional, durable support vessel? Definite buy. While the Birds of Prey can be forced into the role, they lack durability compared to the Palisade. The Varanus is a nearer match, but without the repair platform, it's an inferior support ship, and even with it, it lacks flexibility in its bridge officer seating. The Volkuv is massively more durable, and the hangar bays give it options the Palisade will never have, but the lack of agility seriously hurts it in a fast-moving scenario. For Federation players, things are a little less clear-cut. The Aatrox is in a similar boat to the Volkuv. Its support abilities are slightly better because of the altered bridge officer setup, and it has similarly massively increased durability, and the hangar bays give it an obvious edge. But again, the lack of agility hurts its ability to handle a rapidly developing situation. The Vesta is better than the Palisade, end of. When fitted with auxiliary phaser cannon, it doesn't have to compromise quite so much between auxiliary and weapon power, and the setup has a bite the Palisade can't hope to match. The hangar bay adds even more power and flexibility, and the consoles give it access to some fairly ridiculous abilities. The catch, of course, is that the full set will set you back 5,000 Zen, so if you don't fancy either shoveling actual money at Cryptic or the dilithium grind to end all grinds, the Palisade is still an exceptional support vessel, and it happens to be a sight cheaper than the Vesta 3 set to get hold of. For the Riansu among us, the decision basically comes down to Warbird versus Starship. The Palisade is the better support vessel, although the gap is not quite as pronounced as it is with the Varanus. However, the Hanom has a strategic advantage with its battle cloak. The Singularity powers give it options the Palisade doesn't have, particularly for control with the Singularity teleport, and the overall feel will be an easier adjustment for Romulan players used to Warbirds, and like all the fleet vessels, it's significantly cheaper than the Palisade if you're buying fleet modules at the current price of 7.5 million energy credits. 4 modules, that's 28 million plus the 20,000 fleet credits, compared to the 80 million you'd have to spend on a Palisade. And that, ladies and gentlemen, just about wraps it up for this look at the Palisade science vessel. I am usual. Credit goes once again to @InputEnd, without whom this wouldn't have happened, and until next time, farewell.